So through this pandemic, it's allowed us to meet people like that. I never met the lady at the food pantry in Anvil. I never didn't even know the people at the church in Jackson County, which is probably 20 minutes away from me. So it's just put us in touch with a lot more people, made us a lot more visible, and I think that because of this, it'll just give us so much more growth to where we can continue to do what we have to do to continue to help people.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, NCAT Sustainable Agriculture Specialist Mike Lewis sits down with Wayne Riley, Executive Director of the Laurel County African American Heritage Center in London, Kentucky. They discuss Mr. Riley's work in the community, including the challenges and benefits that have arisen during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Laurel County African American Heritage Center is a nonprofit founded in 2004 to preserve African American history in Laurel County, Kentucky. The center has grown in its mission and operation since that time, and today it operates the center, a working and educational farm, a commercial kitchen, and a farmer's market. Let's listen.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Mike Lewis from the Northeast Office of the National Center for Appropriate Technologies. Coming to you today from London, Kentucky, Laurel County. Excited to be here today with a good friend and sometimes a co-conspirator of mine, Mr. Wayne Riley from the Laurel County African American Heritage Center. Wayne founded the center in 2004 right here in London, Kentucky. And you might wonder why we're here. I always joke with Wayne that his name doesn't have much to do with food, but Wayne's heavily invested in food security for his local community. Wayne, I really appreciate you letting me in here on short notice. Always great to be in the center. There's so much great history. We are sitting in the center. Do you want to tell us about yourself and the center, Wayne?
So my name is Wayne Riley, and I'm with the director at the Laurel County African American Heritage Center. I started the center in 2004, basically to save the church that I grew up in. I'm a carpenter by trade. Didn't really know what I was doing. And I met some interesting people along the way that have kind of led us and stirred us in the right direction to get us to where we're at today. The center itself was the purpose for it was to preserve the history of the African American population of Laurel County. And I guess a little after that, we realized that it was going to be hard in a community of 2% or less African American population to survive with just talking about a museum. So we started doing some outreach programs. Probably our first outreach was centered around donated food that we gave away and clothing and things like that. And it just kind of went from that to the point of where I was introduced to David Cook, who at that time was just freshly starting Grow Appalachia. And at that point, we became part of Grow Appalachia through a connection between Bill Turner and David Cook. And we started our journey into producing fresh food.
Well, that's great. And just for reference, I think I likely met you through Grow Appalachia too, which is a tremendous program out of Berea College in Berea, Kentucky.
Yes.
So they support a lot of community gardens, but then also now they've transitioned to more supporting small scale farmers, right?
Right.
And I think it's so interesting, you know, you started, and I see that a lot, and it happened to me too, like my transition into food issues, right? You didn't come into this for food, but at the end of the day, you realized that food was the one factor that seemed to have the most impact on how the health and wellness of our communities, or what was it that really brought you to the food production side of community
Well,
support?
I think with the food production, you know, when we think back to the way food was grown when we were small local communities before we had all of this mass trucked food that was trucked in, seemed like we had less health issues from the food that was grown on small farms and backyards and places like that. So for me, it was a thing of with Grow Appalachia, what really attracted me to them was that they were talking about organic and not using all these chemicals and pesticides and things like that. Also, when I look back at it, I look back at some of my family that was in the Vietnam War that came back with all of these issues from the chemicals that were sprayed throughout the jungles over there. And some of those same chemicals are in the pesticides that we spray our food with.
Yeah, for me, I think you're saying the same thing. For me, I read a book by Liberty Hyde Bailey. It was written like turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s, but it was called This Holy Earth. And he had this one section in the book, but one quote that really stuck out to me. And it was something akin to, if we can't treat the land and the resources that provide for our well-being with dignity and respect, how can we ever expect to treat each other with dignity and respect? And so it sounds like that's the same sort of thing. The foundation is always food and connections. So,
well, food always seems like food is also a good way of always bringing people together. You talk about food. A good food conversation can lead to any kind of conversation. But if you're sitting around food, it seems like it just soothes the soul and opens people's mind and kind of relaxes people.
I would agree, but then I would counter that way. And with every time I talk with you about food, it seems like we just end up creating more work for ourselves. We're in this unique space where we suffer from what I believe Martin Richards was the first one that told me this, from Community Farm Alliance, the oppression of opportunity. There's so much to do that it's hard to really narrow in and get things done. Especially now, right, with the pandemic. How has the pandemic sort of changed the focus of your work and impacted it?
Well, for me, with the pandemic, I think we went a lot of our people that were part of our garden program were older people. It was very hard to get them connected with the Zoom calls and the things like that. So our garden program kind of slacked off, and we went from a garden program to where we still felt like that we needed to stay in touch with the community and support the community in different ways. And the way that we decided that we were going to support the community was by increasing our capacity with our food pantry. And because of that, there was a lot of food out there. There was a lot of government food programs out there. And so we kind of tapped into that. And so we started doing an outreach. Our outreach was more centered around food that had already been produced and ready for market. That was a lot of it was donated by factories. Some of it was food that was on trucks that it came to Walmart distribution that had got turned down and stuff like that. And so we were able to capitalize on that and be able to turn around and put that food back into the community.
Well, I just want to add, give you kudos for that, because it wasn't just your community, right? I mean, one of the things I think that you have this great capacity to do, and we're so fortunate to have you as like a leader in this community, is you're able to get out of your community, right? I mean, you had my wife delivering food, you had me delivering food to different counties, so your footprint actually was larger than that, and it made a huge impact. So I just want to point out that while you said the local community, your work has certainly spread from this center into several surrounding counties, right?
Yeah, and I think it's very important, that we do reach out to other communities, because of the technology today. I feel like that our neighborhoods are much wider based than what they were when I grew up, where you were lucky if you had a telephone. Usually one car in a family, and so with the technology that we have today, I think it's very important that we share that and that we stretch out beyond the borders of our county lines and things like that. I met a lot of people with this during this pandemic. Our normal giveaway day was on Wednesday that we did at the center, and on Tuesday and Thursday I did picked up food for other small churches and small organizations that didn't necessarily have the means of picking up for just one pallet of food. It costs a lot of money to go all the way across the country to pick up a pallet of food. So I'd pick up 10 pallets, and then these or the organizations would come and pick it up at the kitchen, and then we disperse it from there for their particular communities or organizations or whatever they were doing with it.
Yeah, you covered up 3 counties in organic beans for the next 18 months, right? I seem to remember that 18-wheeler of organic, was it pinto, white beans, and red beans?
And red beans, yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun time. You had pallets of beans fill in the center. So I do want to touch on that, because on top of just the work you do at the center, you guys also have, I know you've got a new refrigerated truck. And you also have a community-based commercial kitchen just a quarter or half a mile up the road from here at the center, and that's where you do most of your distribution from. But with your commercial kitchen, what are your hopes for that, and how do you see that long term helping to reshape the landscape for farmers? I mean, I'm just 12 miles from your commercial kitchen, so how do you think that is, and what's your vision for it?
Well, with the commercial kitchen, when we designed this kitchen, I think it was a bit of a challenge, and it was kind of designed through a grant through Appalachia, but at the same time that Appalachia was part of it, I kind of got involved with Kentucky State, and through them we just kept adding things to it. So at the kitchen, I think that it'll be something that people can process food in, get them a label, and be able to sell that food and be sustainable. At the same time, because of the contact with Kentucky State, we actually added the docking station for the mobile meat processing unit, the vegetable processing unit. So those trailers could actually back in there if we were overrun with vegetable production inside, so we could actually get that trailer brought down, and you could process inside and outside the building in the trailer. With the mobile meat processing trailer, it can back in there, dock. You can process chickens, turkeys, rabbits, quail, and catfish on it. So I think it leaves a lot of room for a lot of different things that could be done that could make people's lives and families sustainable.
Yeah, value. I mean, definitely you're a small farmer too, right? Being a small farmer with definitely a lot of value in figuring out how to maximize your revenue on a specific crop. And as we know from what we've seen, there's more money in selling salsa than a tomato to simplify the conversation. So you also have a farm too, right? So you have the museum here, you have the commercial kitchen and the delivery trucks, but you also have a demonstration farm that you grow food on, and that food goes back into the community. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that, and I was interested yesterday. Part of the reason I said I would come down today is you said you were working hard because you'd had a labor shortage. So could you talk a little bit about your demonstration farm and how the pandemic has impacted your labor? Because I know that some of your labor is through prison work release programs to help with rehabilitation. So how has the pandemic impacted your ability to operate your farm?
It's put a real strain on us because we don't have paid employees with anything that we do. Everything is based on volunteers. And as you said, probably 80% of our labor has always came from the inmates at the jail. And throughout the pandemic, they've been on lockdown, which meant that they couldn't come out of the jail because of the pandemic. So it just kind of put a real pinch on us because we relocated the farm. So it put a pinch on us getting the high tunnels all back up and in place, getting the fencing done that we needed done for the animals and things like that, even down to the weed eating and the everyday maintenance around all of this that has to be done. it's basically was always done by the inmates of the jail. They got out for a short period of time, and we thought it was going to kind of pick back up, and we were going to get some more things done. And then all of a sudden, now we're back to the shutdown again. We're going to just keep pushing forward. It's just a little bit slower pace than what we would normally like to be going at.
So I don't want to skip an opportunity to ask you, because I think that you're, through all of our conversations and works, you're one of those people that even in the midst of complete crisis still manages to see the light at the end of the tunnel, or the positive side of the situation. So are there any really positive takeaways that we could close out with from the pandemic? Like anything that's happened that the pandemic's awful, but it led to this?
We're one of the things is we're sitting right here in the building. I think the pandemic slowed us down, but it also allowed us to do some things that we need to be done. In this little building that I'm in, it's always been a church. When I come back in here, the walls were just white. During the pandemic, it was slow, and we had time, so we did a lot of remodeling. We had to replace some paneling, just decorate, painted, moved some stuff around, opened it up to where looks more spacious and looks more appealing to the people that come into it, and not just the plain old stale looking walls that had been in here for the last 30 years. So I think with the pandemic, I think it's allowed us growth, and the growth has been to change some things that we probably, I've been wanting to get in here and do a lot of this stuff for a long time, but just never really had the time to do it. And the pandemic kind of made time for us to do it. And then at the same time we were doing it, we're still moving forward with everything that we want to do. I think with our food part of it, because of the pandemic, it put us in touch with I thought I knew a lot of people before the pandemic as far as the garden program with Grow Appalachia, but with the food program, I've met people in Jackson County, that little churches in Jackson County, the little small food pantry up on the mountain, McKee, that little lady over 80 some years old that is busting wide open with just energy to make sure that people in her community are getting the necessary food that they need. And I guess for me, I don't like to, when you start talking about free food, a lot of people start thinking and talking about lazy people, trifling people. There's a lot of people out there today that are grandparents trying to raise grandkids, and they're not lazy and trifling. They're just needing a little helping hand, lift them up out of it, because they have a heart and they can't turn their grandkids away. So so they're just trying to feed them and take care of them the best way that they can. So through this pandemic, it's allowed us to meet people like that. I never met the lady at the food pantry in Anvil. I didn't even know the people at the church in Jackson County, which is probably 20 minutes away from me. So it's just put us in touch with a lot more people, made us a lot more visible, and I think that because of this, it'll just give us so much more growth to where we can continue to do what we have to do to continue to help people, and at the same time still stay focused on the gardening, and when the time is right, we'll get back to where hopefully the gardening will be a full-blown program again.
It's so interesting. I was thinking this almost the same thing you were just saying. It's like sometimes when you slow down, there's actually a benefit, and I think the pandemic, the situation we're in now has forced everybody to slow down. And when we slow down, we start to look within our own house, whether that's, let's redecorate here and let's get the things that have been behind. But it also makes us think about, what's really important. And I think that to me is the one thing, like being, I don't want to say stuck at home, but locked at home with the family, it's really helped, I think, everybody that I work with reprioritize and see what is actually important. Like these neighbors that are 20 miles away that we didn't know that are doing all this great work. Those are really the things that matter. So we're about out of time, Wayne. I do want to ask you, though, is there anything that you want to specifically talk about? Anything that you want people to know about your work, the center?
No,
what can we do to help?
I just think that we just need to stay focused on people and understand that it doesn't make any difference who we are or who our neighbors are, that we just need to love and respect our neighbors and our families and be the best people that we can and not get caught up in the midst of all of the chaos that gets thrown into the midst of all this. I've always said that, a lot of people would rather hear about how many people got shot on the street rather than hear about how many people me and Mike may have fed throughout the year. So the negative is always going to try to outweigh the positive, and we just have to stay positive and continue to do the best that we can.
I don't even have a great closing. This is Mike Lewis from NCAT with Wayne Riley from the Laurel County African American Heritage Center, advising everyone to stay positive and help your neighbors.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at atra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.